Welcome everyone to this episode of Operating with Positive Impact, Series 2. Today we will have the chance to touch upon carbon and decarbonation, and we will discuss basically around how Europe is planning to, let's say, impact outside of its own boundaries, other continent and countries to decarbonize themselves and going through decarbonization journey, and also how they plan to, protect European industries, because decarbonation might sometimes go with higher investment and things like that. So to discuss this today, I have the chance to have Rossana with me.
Hello, everyone.
Pleasure to meet you, Rossana.
Nice to meet you as well.
Maybe can you introduce a bit yourself, what you're doing professionally and how you link, let's say, with decarbonation?
So my name is Rossana Gresia and I work for the Federal Public Service, Health, Food Chain Safety and Environment in Belgium. It might say nothing, but in reality is the National Competent Authority for CBAM, this Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. Okay.
And how did you ended up, let's say, working for the SPF? So what is a bit of your journey? How did you get into carbon?
I started initially with my background, my educational background in international relations, European studies, always with a deep interest for environment. So I had some experience during my university at the United Nations Environment Program, and then I had the chance to work for 10 years in international cooperations, mainly in projects related to climate change, environment, but also trade and private sector. So then CBAM, it's really the combination of two somehow. So since 1 year and a half, I'm happily working for the Federal Public Service.
Okay. And you're mentioning the word CBAM, and I guess not everybody knows what this word is. But before going into CBAM, I think another concept to introduce is ETS, right?
Indeed.
Which maybe will help us to understand a bit more what CBAM is and why it came out. So Can you explain us what is that concept of ETS?
Yes, actually CBAM wouldn't exist if the emission trading system, ETS, wasn't implemented first. It was the European Union introduced in 2005 the emission trading system that, to explain in really simple words, it was decided that energy-intensive industry and power installation could pollute until a cap. So there was an allowed amount of emission that could be generated through production, but then behind this threshold, companies need to pay it. So there was the idea behind was to limit the pollution, to try to reduce CO2 emissions. But then there was the parallel risk of carbon leakage. So these same companies that were submitted to ETS could produce outside the EU where the environmental standards were lower than in the EU. So that's why CBAM enters into play. Okay.
So, and then how CBAM, let's say, tried to correct this aspect of indeed the fact that emissions here in Europe are, let's say, there is a cap, so you cannot go above a certain threshold or you have to pay, while outside you don't have that. So how is, let's say, CBAM trying to correct this?
CBAM was introduced really as a mirror. We talk of CBAM sometimes as the mirror of the ETS. And the idea is that there is a fair level playing field between EU and non-EU production. So basically, they are both at the same level. And this is implementing through by some imported goods released for free circulation in the EU are for those goods is needed to report what are the emissions generated during the production. In this way, what we call under EU ETS, the allowances, so when companies pay actually to pollute, the equivalent would be also paid for the emission generated outside the EU.
Okay. And for me to try to understand a bit further, so in the ETS system today, so if you go above a certain threshold, you have to pay.
Yeah.
Okay. And now with that CBAM, companies that are importing goods which requires, let's say, also high carbon intensive ones, right?
Yes.
This goes as well into the bucket of the emissions the company is producing then. And if they go above then the cap, including, let's say, the imported goods carbon emissions, then they will have to pay. Is that a bit how it's going to work, or how is that?
Not really. We are not yet there. In order to mirror exactly the EU ETS and CBAM, from 2026, when there will be actually the full implementation of CBAM, implying also financial implication through the sale and the surrendering of CBAM certificates. So this payment for emitting, it will be mirrored, because nowadays EU companies receive some free allocation. So there is this cap. Some emissions are given for free. This right to pollute, let's call it like that. But by 26, progressively, the free allocation will be reduced, and also CBAM certificates will be introduced progressively, because the idea behind is always to keep this fair treatment between EU and non-EU production.
Okay.
So while, for example, in 2006, there will be a payment of 2.5% of CBAM certificates, then the free allocation will be also reduced by 2.5, so that there is no unfair competition between EU and non-EU producers. Is it?
I'm trying to understand the concept of that certificate, right? So if I'm a company, indeed, and I'm buying products, and we can discuss after the types of products that are in the scope of CBAM, but I'm buying a product outside of the EU, what is going on? How is that certificate, let's say, implying that I would have to pay something, or how does that certificate works?
The idea is that if one certificate is equivalent of 1 ton of CO2.
Okay.
So if you have emitted 1, for example, 3, just to give a number, then you would need to buy 3 CBAM certificates.
To import the product in.
You can import first. It's always retroactive, because it's done after taking into consideration the import of the year before. So, for example, 31st May 2027 is the first year where there will be an annual declaration, where companies will declare all their imports for the previous year, 2006, but then there will be also the amount of emissions that have been generated, whether or not a carbon price has been paid in the country of production.
Okay.
And in that case, the carbon price that was already paid in the country of production will be deducted. And then the difference, if there is any carbon price, will be paid as CBAM, by CBAM certificate.
Okay. Okay, and this will be aligned then, of course, with the reduction of what you said on the other hand, on the ETS side.
Yes, because as of now, in the ETS system, there is some allowances that are freely given, so that we call free allocation. And then if the company produces more than this threshold, then they need to buy their right to pollute, if you wish, just to make it easier to understand. But the idea is that progressively in the ETS system, free allowances will disappear, and there will be all allowances will be paid, basically will be bought and surrendered once a year.
Any carbon that you would emit basically in the future, that's the idea.
Yes.
You will have to pay for that carbon that you emit.
Yes.
There will not be any cap anymore. You basically, whenever you want to emit something, you will have to. There is a price to pay for it.
There will be still a cap, but there will be not anymore a certain amount of emission that will be given free.
Yeah.
And others will be need to be bought, basically.
Okay.
So.
And I guess it's quite of a big change, right, for companies and organizations in general. And how is the EU planning to enforce this, right? Will there be penalties, or if you don't, for example, provide information on your emissions that you're importing, for example? How is that going to work?
Yeah, perhaps before talking about penalties, CBAM is progressively implemented. So we are now in a transitional phase that has started the 1st October 2023, and it will finish 31st of December 2025. And this is really a learning period for everyone, because it's new for everyone. And it's really good actually also for companies to have this transitional period, because there are no financial implications now. It's just reporting information.
Yep.
And this will be really this information is key for the Commission also to elaborate, to draft secondary legislation, and somehow to mind also the gap between the legislation and actual implementation. That's why this information, these data are really crucial for the Commission. But there is also, as you were mentioning, the possibility of penalties, but we see penalties really as a last resort in case there is unwillingness to comply. So we are trying our best to inform as much as possible all the actors that are subject to CBAM, and our purpose is far to be the ones of imposing penalties. But they are there to making sure that everyone complies, especially in case of unwillingness to comply.
Indeed. And allez, what is the size of these penalties? Do you know a bit?
They vary between 10 and 50 euro. And then in Belgium, we are preparing all the system for the application of the penalties, and we are considering several principles, whether it's the first time or not.
Yeah.
That there's been cases of non-compliance. By non-compliance, it can be that the report was not submitted, or the report was incomplete or was incorrect, and there was no willingness to submit a complete or a correct or just submit a report.
Yeah, I understand.
And then also we take into consideration the size of the mission that were not declared. In case, for example, we see that in a report, the emissions are underreported. So
okay.
If we see, we also want to consider the importance of the emission. And then other principles that are listed in the regulation. For example, whether there is this willingness to cooperate, to collaborate, good faith, and yeah.
And in terms of timeline, I mean, is it going to apply to any type of goods, any company, or is there, specific companies that are impacted by that CBAM, others that are not? Can you give us a bit of view on that?
Yes, sure. The CBAM is limited to sectors, but more than speaking about sectors, is really it's important that companies verifies the custom code that are listed in the regulation. Most of them cover 6 sectors: electricity, hydrogen, fertilizer, iron and steel, aluminium, and cement.
All right.
But by the end of 2025, the Commission might decide to enlarge the scope. We still don't know. We are not. It's still too early to have any concrete information on this. But there is this possibility to revise the scope of CBAM. But it's always important to verify the custom code.
Yeah, the custom code.
Yeah.
And are you speaking about the custom code? And it might not be easy for everyone to see the direct link. Of course, we understand that it's importing products, but why is there a link with the custom code specifically and CBAM? Can you explain us a bit the custom and how it links with CBAM a bit? Yes.
Through the custom codes, it's possible actually to identify whether this, to identify the actual good that has been imported. And it's easier also because we talk about import. Mm-hmm. So it's also a very, there is a link obviously with the customs. And also there will be, with the definitive phase, only authorized CBAM declarants will be able to import CBAM goods. All right. So this means that there is a kind of license of import for those goods, and the custom will be verifying Indeed. Whether there is, whether an importer can or not import those specific
and
goods.
whether they are respecting then that CBAM regulation to be able to import the product.
Yeah.
But that's going to be the case only as of 2026, you're saying, that they're going to control that at the import side?
Yes, this is for the definitive phase, so it's the 1st January 2006. But then there is all process of giving the authorization that will start already next year in 2025.
Okay. And also by pure interest, what's the role of the SPF Santé Publique, right? Where you are working, let's say, what is your role in developing this CBAM and implementing this?
We are national competent authority. So the regulation, CBAM regulation, established that in each member state there is one national competent authority, and our role is mainly to making sure that reporting declarants are compliant, and we work to ensure compliance with the legislation. So on one hand, we advise, we guide reporting declarants in their process to make themselves compliant with the legislation. We have done several info sessions. We try to participate as much as possible to any informative event like today, because we want to make sure that everyone is aware on CBAM and whether they are subject or not to CBAM. And also we play also a role in verifying the reports. The first line is the Commission, so they are the first one checking the content and the compliance of reports. And in case they identify any anomaly, uncompliance or any possible mistake or error, then they will contact us, and then we liaise with the reporting declarant directly to making sure that the report is submitted again and all errors are addressed properly.
Okay. But that means that also on top of the custom itself, there is a yearly report that will then be provided to the Commission on, okay, those are all the imported goods and their related emissions. Is that correct?
Yes, there are two different streams, I would say. On one hand, the import side of the goods, where the custom plays a role. The regulation gave a specific role to the custom, that is the one to inform about the obligations. They will mainly deal with the part related to the import of the goods. But then, for the time being, during the transitional phase, is every quarter that a report needs to be submitted. But afterwards, for the definitive phase, it will be one single report per year that will be submitted. And in the report is submitted through a platform, an electronic platform, and it mentions again the quantity of CBAM goods that have been imported, the direct and indirect emissions, so the emissions that have been generated during production or the electricity that has been generated for the production, and also any carbon price that has been already paid. And for the definitive period, there will be also additional information related to the verification of the emission by specific entities. Okay. And by there, for the definitive, on the basis of this report, for the definitive period, it will be also established the number of certificates that companies would need to surrender.
Yeah. I guess it is, theoretically speaking, I understand, right? We are importing products. I would like to know the amount of emissions that were emitted to produce this product and import them. In practice, it is not easy to measure that, or how is the Commission planning, for example, on checking, right, what is correct, not correct, or because, I mean, even companies that are trying to understand their own emissions, right, across their value chain, it's very difficult. And in that case, they will have to report officially on that and potentially pay taxes, right, on this, to buy the certificates. I mean, how do you see that, this complexity, this challenge?
Clearly, CBAM, it's a complex mechanism, a lot of actors involved, and a lot of collaboration needed between all actors. And indeed, it's also a challenge to establish how to monitor emission, which methodology also to to the calculation of the emission, and also why the transitional phase is really important, because until the end of this year, there is the possibility to use, for importers, to use different methodologies as far as their calculation, the result of it is correct, and there might be minor difference between a method or another. But the idea behind it also for the Commission to see the methodology that are used and identify the only single methodology to be used. So there are still studies ongoing at the moment, and the Commission will be informing us on the single methodology that will be needed to be used, and this will also harmonize. It will assure the harmonization of the different methodologies that have been used, and also it will allow us to say, okay, perhaps for these items there is a mistake, because then you will be able to also have an idea what would be a reasonable range
or amount, indeed, and you can compare a bit more.
Yes.
Indeed. And purely by interest as well, but what are those type of methodologies, right, that are used, that you see being used today by companies to measure their emissions and report?
There are some that are calculation based, and then we have seen now many. We haven't seen so much methodology from our side at the moment, to be honest, because we are still. Because most of the companies have used default values. So we are really, I think we will see this much more in the next quarter, because then we will be able to analyze the report and see actually the type of methodology. Because again, the first line in the current process is the Commission. So it's the Commission who has really the view of what has been used, what has been applied by reporting declarant, and then if there are inconsistencies, we are contacting as national competent authority. So I'm not really ready to reply to this question, but I think from the upcoming quarter we will be able to see more of this content, because also actual values would need to be used.
Yeah. But I think you touched upon an important point, is that today, if I'm not mistaken, companies have the option to use default values, meaning that if you import 1 ton of steel, for example, that means X amount of CO2. Mm-hmm. Is that correct? And how is this number planned to evolve, or companies will be able to continue to use these standard numbers instead of an exact value?
Yes, indeed. There were quite a lot of challenges around actual and default values. The full utilization of default values was possible until 31st July 2024, meaning that as for the imports, the good imports imported as of 1st July, actual emission should be used.
Actual emissions, so real emissions.
Real emission, yes. But we understand that there are a lot of constraints. Sometimes it's producers in third countries are reluctant to provide information because of data confidentiality. Sometimes there are no monitoring system in place.
Indeed.
Sometimes there is no reply from producers. So we are aware of all these type of challenges, and the regulation mentioned clearly that the reporting declarant has to show that has done whatever was in his possibility.
To get the information.
To get information. As in Belgium, we understand the constraint, the challenges. So we have decided that we can accept still default values in exceptional cases, only if the reporting declarant has done everything it could do, but it couldn't gather any actual values.
Okay.
So we understand the constraint, but it's really important to provide a good justification, a solid justification, and also provide all the evidences in the report, showing that everything was done by the reporting declarant. And the idea behind also is that the companies continues making progress internally to try to get the actual data, because they are key for the for the definitive phase.
Yep.
So the idea is, okay, the next quarter, if a company uses default values, this needs to be justified. We need evidence. But if the following quarters we have the same justification, the same evidence, we don't see the extra effort that has been done. So we might be in a position not to accept the full use of default values, or if the same installation has given actual value for another importer, then we might ask for more clarification.
Indeed.
Why default values have been used. But we recognize, we acknowledge that there are some challenges at the moment.
But I don't know if you have these type of numbers, but if we look at today, do we see more companies then following the exact rule, giving, let's say, the exact values, or still a vast majority of companies still providing the default values because they simply cannot? What do you see?
So far, with the 3 first quarters, so since October 2023 until June 2024, we have seen mostly default values, but it also depends on the size of the reporting declarant and the sector. In some sectors, it's easier to get actual values. Some big companies might also easily have the resources to get actual data, while a small import or one-person company might have more challenges to get actual data. So there are several aspects to take into consideration.
Yeah, but I mean, if we look, for example, at if we would sum up all the imported CO2 into the European Union, like you would say, what, 50% is let's say calculated through default value, and 50%.
I think I don't have figures, but I would say more than 50%.
With default values still.
With default values, yes.
Okay, so still there is a big step to take, let's say, to go towards the exact numbers of CO2 emissions. Okay. And while we're speaking a bit around these challenges and limitations a bit, right? Do you see other limitations of this one? Because in the end, the purpose at first is to put, let's say, the European industries, let's say, to the same level in terms of competition with regards to carbon as non-EU based companies, right? So the purpose at first is good. I think it's positive, but in the implementation, we already talked about one challenge on getting the exact data. Are there other limitations today at that system?
So far, as NCA, as National Competent Authority, our main challenges was also to identify the reporting declarant, the importers that are subject to CBAM, and reach them. That's why we are always open, and we are doing communication and visibility campaigns. Okay. It's not always easy because in CBAM regulation, we see the reporting declarant as either the importer directly, but it can be also an indirect customer representative. But the issue is that most companies use direct customer representative. That is different, and so they cannot submit CBAM reports. They are not liable for the CBAM obligation. So sometimes the communication doesn't. There is no communication between the importer themselves and the direct customer representatives that receive the information from the customs. Okay. So sometimes there is a gap, and we are trying it to minimize as much as possible. But we are working on it. We do our best, and
basically the main limitation that you see is that people are not aware of this.
Yes, although now it's more than 1 year. I mean, it's almost 1 year implementation, but still some are discovering. Also because we have also identified that some companies just refer to the sectors and not to the CN code, so the custom codes. So this is sometimes also the tricky part. It's really important to check whether goods are listed or not in the regulation.
In the regulation itself.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then we also see from the importer side, the reporting declarant, and also the installation, finding the data. The data is a big challenge on one end, because sometimes the question is, who in companies we have seen who has the data, how create collaboration within the company between different departments, and how to comply, then how to consolidate all the data. And in other cases, we have also seen companies that couldn't get data because of data confidentiality. And the Commission has done also, has been really proactive in this, because as they have carried out many field missions in countries to identify the actual challenges.
Yeah.
And also from 2025, the CBAM transitional registry, which is the platform where reports are submitted, can be also accessible directly to the operators of third countries. So they can basically declare,
I am going to import in the EU this good.
I'm producing this good. It will be this amount of emission that is produced. So in this way, only the Commission or only national competent authorities will access this data for ensuring CBAM compliance, but their clients basically won't have this access to this information, because for some sectors, having this information might have some commercial challenges.
And why would then, let's say, external company from the EU provide that information? What's in for them?
They need to comply, and
to be able to import.
They are not directly legally. They are not obliged to comply by the directive, by the regulation. It's mainly the reporting declarants or the importers, but then of course it might affect them in their business. Because
maybe the importer will choose
another one. So it's also in their interest. It's a business decision at the end of the day. Because legally they are not obliged to comply. But if the data confidentiality is the real issue, then now we have a solution.
Okay. And so we spoke a little bit around future development. So with the next steps. So meaning that 2026 is really, if I understand well, the date to remember, because it will be the moment where we will start to see these carbon credit certificates being started. What are other potential future developments for the directive? Do you know a bit? Can you explain us view on the potential future that's ahead of us?
At the end of 2025, the Commission will provide a report to the Parliament and the Council, and there will be a little bit the state of play of the initial transitional phase, and there will be also potentially again, we don't know yet.
We're speaking about future events that we don't know yet, of course.
Whether the scope of CBAM will be extended or not. So basically, whether additional products will be added, will be covered by CBAM, or whether additional sectors. Okay, of course, there will be always this the need to check the CN codes, the custom codes, but whether other products that now are mostly affecting other sectors will be also covered by CBAM. Okay.
And in terms of the price itself of the certificates, is this already carved in stone, or is it still under discussion, or with the cost, let's say, basically for
the CBAM certificate? Their price will be established. It's really linked to the ETS.
Reduction.
Yes. So the price of the ETS allowances, there will be a weekly average. So the CBAM certificate, the price of the CBAM certificate will be established by on the basis of the weekly average of the ETS.
Okay.
Allowances. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, very, very interesting so far. And I would like to ask you a question that we ask often towards the end of our episode, a bit more, but a bit more taking a bit of a step back, right? If you would be able to give a message, right, to every boardroom, what would that message be?
About CBAM, right?
About CBAM or about carbon, about whatever you feel would be important, like something they should know.
CBAM is often seen as a burden, as a cost, and indeed it has its challenges, but it's also a possibility. It might create a positive impact, and it really depends on how today companies also decide to invest. So it's really, it will enter into force in 2006. What can we do now? Because by reducing CO2, by improving and using innovative green technology, then the CBAM certificates will be lower. So I mean, the impact of the CBAM will be lower to companies. So it really depends how this is seen, I would say, and how businesses and in general the business environment adapt to this new mechanism.
To this new mechanism. And then also there is also potential to see industries not leaving Europe, but maybe growing further in Europe again, right?
Yeah, and also we are seeing that other countries are willing to introduce a similar mechanism than CBAM. Okay. So we can start with the EU, Europe, but then we might have a more global impact. That is also in the medium and long term is also the objectives of CBAM is to achieve climate neutrality. So this might be also one of the solutions.
One of the solutions. And you talked about other countries. Do you know which other countries?
The United States, Australia, UK. We will likely introduce in 2027. So there are already other countries envisaging this type of...
and it will be very similar type of system to adjust the carbon trading system? Or
too early to say, but there will be surely some similarities. Some sectors might be, or some products might be a little bit different. We already see this with the UK. But the idea is to have something similar so that also any potential negative effect might be also neutralized or minimized.
And for me to understand, is there a risk of double taxation in some way? Because, for example, if I'm producing in the US, where there are potential carbon taxes as well, I'm going above a certain threshold, so I need to first pay tax for going above. Then I'm importing in the EU, and then I need to pay for that CBAM, because probably the one that I'm importing my goods is going to ask me to pay, of course, for this additional tax. So there will be tax 2 times, once in the US and once in the EU. Is that possible, or
no? This is also no, because in the CBAM report for the transitional phase and declaration for the definitive phase, it's possible to include the carbon price already paid, so that you can reduce it. So then it can be deduced.
It can be deduced.
The idea is not to give a double taxation. The idea is really to take this into consideration.
Yeah, I think it's a very important point to mention, indeed. And then I would like to ask you another last question. It's not on the boardroom, but now if you would have to say, to give a message to any young person that is joining for the first time, after university workforce, what would you tell them? How would you inspire them to go for SPF, or I don't know?
That's a tricky question, actually. The word of sustainability is a passionate, inspiring one. And with your work, you can make the difference. So I think this is something to consider. And sustainability is part of our present, but also our future. So I think it's something to...
So be wise in your job selection.
Indeed.
To go and to put your energy into a sustainable, let's say, goal and objective.
Yeah, we can build a better world.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much for this podcast.
Thank you.
It was very interesting. I think we went through a lot of different subjects, but related to carbon. So touch upon the ETS, the emission trading system, which was there in Europe, but problem, it was only in Europe, so companies had to pay for their emissions if they were staying in Europe. So what they were doing is they were potentially leaving to produce outside of the EU. And now the EU is trying to rebalance that with this carbon adjustment mechanism, carbon border adjustment mechanism, which we see there are still challenges. It's still in the implementation phase, but with that very noble objective of, in the end, bringing everybody on that journey towards net zero future. So we can only hope that we will reach that thanks to this one, and thanks to your work as well as the SPF.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And for the audience, if you have any questions or anything, please feel free to leave a comment on the different platforms. There are different comment sections, and we will try to answer them in the next episodes. Thank you very much.